Why emotion secretly rules your mind. Hume's shocking insight. Have you ever made a decision that seemed logical at the time, but later, when you look back, you realized it was completely driven by how you felt? Maybe you bought something expensive because it made you feel powerful. Maybe you lashed out at someone, not because they deserved it, but because you were tired or afraid. Or maybe you stayed in a relationship or a job because the thought of leaving scared you more than any rational reason to go. If you've ever wondered why your rational mind sometimes takes a back seat, the Scottish philosopher David Hume has an answer so shocking, so counterintuitive, that it might just change the way you view your entire life. We like to think we're rational beings, that we make decisions based on logic, facts, and reason. We build societies based on laws and policies. We vote, choose careers, raise children, and invest in the future as if we're reason-driven creatures. But what if we're not? What if reason is merely a tool, a servant, while emotion is the true master? David Hume didn't just believe this, he proved it. He argued that reason is, and always will be, the slave of the passions. That's the actual phrase he used, slave of the passions. Not partner, not assistant, slave. And here's the kicker, Hume wasn't saying this to be provocative. He meant it literally. Think about it. You can reason all day about why getting healthy is important. You can read books, watch videos, and even make plans. But until you feel the urgency, until you're emotionally moved by fear, pride, love, or even shame, you won't act. You might know it's time to break up with someone who's hurting you. But until that emotional breaking point hits, until something inside you feels enough pain or courage, you stay. So what's really driving you? This is the heart of Hume's insight. Reason is powerless unless emotion gives it something to do. Reason can tell you how to get what you want, but it can't tell you what to want. That comes from emotion, desire, fear, love, hope.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
Let's go deeper. Imagine you're standing at a crossroads. Two paths. One leads to comfort, the other to growth. Reason can analyze the pros and cons of each path. It can tell you the risks, the gains, but it can't tell you which one to take. That decision comes from what you feel. If you fear stagnation more than discomfort, you'll choose growth. If you fear failure more than boredom, you'll choose comfort. So the final choice isn't made by logic, it's made by emotion. Here's a question for you. If all your emotions were suddenly removed, like flipping a switch, what would happen to your decision-making? Would you become a perfectly rational machine, or would you become paralyzed, unable to choose anything at all? Neurologists studying patients with damage to the emotional centers of the brain have found something fascinating. These people can still think logically. They can still reason, but they can't make basic decisions. They'll stand frozen when asked to choose between 2 restaurants or 2 shirts. Why? Because with no emotional input, there's no value to anything. Logic alone doesn't assign meaning, emotion does. So when Hume says that emotion rules the mind, he's not being metaphorical. He's describing a deep, observable truth about what it means to be human. Logic is a map. Emotion tells you which direction to walk. And yet, we live in a world that worships reason. We're told to be rational and to keep feelings out of it. But that's like asking a painter to work without color. Emotion is not the enemy of reason, it's the foundation of it. Without emotion, reason has no purpose, no aim, no fuel. Now, let's consider the implications of this. If emotion is the core of decision-making, then mastering our emotions isn't just a psychological trick, it's a philosophical necessity. Emotional awareness becomes a kind of wisdom. The more you understand your inner world, the better you can steer your outer one. But here's where it gets even deeper. If emotions guide reason, then where do emotions come from? Are they arbitrary? Are they just chemical reactions? Or do they emerge from something deeper, maybe even something sacred? Let's sit with this question for a moment. Where do your deepest desires come from? From the longing to be loved, the fear of being forgotten, the urge to create, the need to belong. These aren't just emotional impulses. They are existential signposts. They point to something profound within you, something that might even hint at your purpose. And yet, we're told to suppress emotion, to be strong. But what if strength is not the absence of emotion, but the ability to understand and channel it? What if wisdom is not cold detachment, but warm clarity? Imagine if, instead of fearing emotion, we learned to listen to it, to decode it, to ask it, what are you trying to show me? What if every emotion, even the painful ones, was a messenger? A guide? A teacher? That's the revolution Hume quietly proposed. Not that reason is useless, but that it is incomplete without emotion. That emotion is not weakness, but the very essence of what makes us human. So, the next time you feel something deeply, whether it's joy, anger, sadness, or love, don't push it away. Get curious. Ask, what is this emotion trying to tell me? What value is it pointing toward? What truth is it uncovering? Because if Hume is right, and I believe he is, then understanding your emotions is not just emotional intelligence. It's philosophical intelligence. It's the key to unlocking your motivations, your beliefs, and your life's direction. And if that's true, then the secret to mastering yourself might not lie in controlling your emotions, but in understanding how they already control you. The hidden puppet strings, how emotion shapes every belief you have. Let's begin with something bold. You don't believe what you believe because it's objectively true. You believe it because on some level it feels right. But that's not an insult to your intelligence, it's a fundamental feature of human cognition. And yet, we rarely question the emotional foundations of our beliefs. We like to think we believe things because we've reasoned our way to them, that we've carefully weighed facts, compared arguments, and arrived at a conclusion through pure logic. But if we peel back the surface, we start to see the hidden puppet strings emotions quietly pulling every belief we hold. Think about your most deeply held convictions. Maybe it's a political stance, a religious view, an ethical principle. Ask yourself, when did you first adopt that belief? Was it after years of study or in a moment of emotional intensity? Maybe you saw someone suffer and felt anger rise in your chest. Maybe you were moved by a story or a moment of injustice or even a personal loss. That emotional flashpoint became the soil in which your belief grew. And once it took root, your reason built a fortress around it, defending it, justifying it, but never questioning the emotional seed from which it sprang. This is what Hume meant when he said that reason is subordinate to the passions. Your mind isn't a neutral courtroom where logic delivers the verdict. It's more like a theater where emotion writes the script and reason directs the lighting to make it all look convincing. We don't use reason to discover truth, we use it to defend what we already feel to be true. And we're so good at it that we convince ourselves we're being purely rational. But ask yourself this: have you ever changed someone's mind by presenting the perfect argument? If you've tried, you know how hard it is. But why? If reason is king, then the best argument should always win. But it doesn't, because beliefs aren't just ideas, they're emotional investments. They're tied to identity, belonging, memory, and fear. To change someone's belief, you'd have to change their emotional world. And that is far harder than winning a debate. Let's dive into a real-world example. Imagine someone who believes fiercely in hard work and self-reliance. On the surface, it's a rational belief. But dig deeper, and you might find that it's rooted in childhood experiences. Maybe they were raised by a single parent who worked tirelessly, and they associate hard work with survival, dignity, and love. Their belief, then, is not just about economics or philosophy, it's a tribute to their emotional past. Now try to argue with that belief using statistics or theory. It won't work. Because you're not arguing with logic, you're arguing with emotion in disguise. This is why belief systems, religious, political, or even personal, are so resilient. They're held in place not by facts, but by feelings. And the stronger the emotion, the harder they are to shake. Fear, in particular, is a powerful glue. We don't just believe things because they're comforting, we also believe things because we're terrified of what the alternative might mean. That's why sometimes people reject a new idea not because it's false, but because it threatens the emotional ecosystem they built their life upon. So what does this mean for us? Should we give up on truth? Should we stop trying to reason at all? Absolutely not. But we must become emotionally aware thinkers. That means recognizing the emotional roots of our beliefs and questioning not just the logic behind them, but the feelings that gave them life. It means asking, why do I want this to be true? What emotion is this belief protecting or expressing? And here's the real twist. Once you begin to see how emotion shapes belief, you become less susceptible to manipulation. Politicians, marketers, ideologues, they all know that if they can stir the right emotion, they can implant a belief. Fear, pride, outrage, hope, these are the levers of mass persuasion. But if you can pause and say, wait, what emotion is this triggering in me? And why? You reclaim your intellectual freedom. Let me leave you with a question that might haunt you in the best possible way. What do you believe right now? Not because it's true, but because it's emotionally convenient. That's not an easy question. It's a mirror many dare not look into. But if you do, you may discover that some of your beliefs aren't yours at all. They're the echoes of someone else's emotion, planted in your mind years ago. To believe wisely, then, is to feel wisely. To think clearly, you must first feel clearly. And that means stepping into the hidden corners of your emotional world, the fears you won't name, the hopes you won't admit, the memories you've buried deep. Because in those dark places lie the real architects of your beliefs. The emotional compass, why your heart knows before your head does. Let's confront a mystery you've probably felt, but never fully understood. Why do we so often know something in our gut before we can explain it with our words? Why do we sense when someone is lying or when something is off about a situation, even when we don't have the evidence? Why do we fall in love in a moment, but spend years trying to rationalize why we did? The answer, once again, lies deep in the emotional architecture of the human mind. Your heart, metaphorically speaking, often knows the truth long before your head catches up. And that's not a flaw. It's a feature. Emotion is not just a reaction, it's a form of perception. It's how we feel our way through complexity when logic hasn't yet mapped the terrain. Long before you can construct a rational argument, your emotional system is already at work, scanning, evaluating, predicting. It's like an ancient compass, built through evolution, tuned over millennia, pointing you toward survival, connection, and meaning. And while it isn't always accurate in a scientific sense, it's often right in a deeper, more human sense. Let's bring this down to earth. Have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt tension? No one said anything, but something in the air felt heavy. That wasn't logic, it was your emotional radar picking up on micro-expressions, body language, subtle cues. Your nervous system processed it all without your conscious awareness and gave you a feeling, unease. That feeling was your first truth. Only later, maybe, did your brain analyze the situation and come up with theories. But the emotional signal came first. This is why Hume's insight is more than just a philosophical quip, it's a psychological law. We feel before we think. We react before we reflect. And in many cases, this sequence isn't just unavoidable, it's wise. Imagine trying to analyze every possible variable before deciding whether to trust someone or whether to run from danger. You'd be paralyzed. Emotion steps in where reason would drown. Now, this doesn't mean emotion is infallible. Our emotional compass can be distorted by trauma, bias, conditioning. But even then, it's not the enemy. It's a signal. It's saying, something matters here. Pay attention. The mistake is not in feeling, it's in ignoring the feeling, or in treating it as irrational noise instead of meaningful data. And here's the deeper truth. Even our most rational decisions are often post-rationalizations of emotional intuitions. We decide with our feelings, then justify with our minds. You choose a career because it feels meaningful, then explain it as a strategic move. You end a friendship because something feels broken, then construct a narrative to make sense of it. The head follows the heart, not the other way around. This truth has massive implications for how we live. It means we must learn to listen to our emotions, not obey them blindly, but listen with curiosity. But what is this fear trying to protect? What is this joy pointing toward? What is this anger defending? What is this sadness grieving? Emotions are not interruptions to logic, they are invitations to wisdom. Let me ask you something. How many times have you silenced your heart in favor of your head only to regret it later? You stayed in the safe job, the safe relationship, the safe life not because you were happy, but because your mind convinced you it made sense. But deep inside, something whispered that you were betraying yourself, and that whisper, that's the emotional compass. And every time we ignore it, we drift a little further from who we really are. And yet, we're taught to distrust emotion. We're told it's weak, unstable, unreliable. But that's like blaming a compass for pointing north. Emotion isn't the enemy of truth, it's the beginning of it. It's the first signal that something matters, that something is real, that something is at stake. And if we learn to decode that signal, we can align our lives with something far deeper than logic alone, something meaningful. So here's a challenge. For the next week, listen to your emotional compass. Not just the loud emotions, but the quiet ones, the subtle tugs, the gentle discomforts, and the unexpected joys. Ask yourself, What is this feeling trying to show me that my mind hasn't yet seen? And then just maybe let that insight guide you. Because perhaps the greatest wisdom isn't thinking without feeling, but feeling with awareness. Let your heart speak, and let your mind learn to listen. The final revelation, but why mastering emotion is the key to philosophical freedom. We've traveled through Hume's insight, like explorers venturing into the neglected depths of our own minds. And now we arrive at the final revelation, perhaps the one that matters most. But the goal is not to suppress emotion, or even to overcome it. The goal is to master it. And by mastery, I do not mean dominance, I mean understanding, harmony, integration. Because only when we understand how emotion governs reason can we begin to live with true philosophical freedom. What is freedom, really? Most people think it's the ability to choose whatever we want. But if our wants are shaped by emotional forces we don't understand, fears we've inherited, desires implanted by culture, cravings born from wounds, then are we really free? Or are we just reacting? Are we choosing? Or are we being pulled by invisible strings? This is where Hume's insight transforms from a theory into a mirror. It doesn't just describe how the mind works, it shows us why we suffer. So much of our pain comes from the collision between our unconscious emotions and our conscious expectations. We think we're acting logically, but we're really just chasing feelings we haven't named. We think we're pursuing truth, but we're really seeking emotional validation. We think we're free, but we're not, because we don't know who's really in control. And here's the paradox: you can't think your way out of this trap. You can't reason your way to freedom if reason itself is being steered by emotion. The only way out is through emotional awareness, and through radical honesty with yourself, and through turning inward and asking over and over again, what am I feeling and why? This is not soft advice. This is the hardest kind of discipline. It's philosophical courage, because to look into your emotional world is to confront the parts of yourself you've buried, and the parts that hurt, the parts you're ashamed of, the parts that make you feel weak. But these are also the parts that hold your power, because every avoided emotion is a locked door in the house of your mind. And behind every locked door is a truth you need to live fully. To master emotion is not to be emotionless, it's to make peace with your own humanity. It's to realize that your anger is trying to protect something sacred, that your sadness is grieving something you loved, that your fear is alerting you to change, that your joy is showing you what matters. And once you understand that, you stop fighting your emotions and you start learning from them. Imagine what your life would be like if you could feel without being overwhelmed. If you could name your emotions as they arise, track their origins, and choose your response. That's freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to know why you want it, to see clearly, act wisely, and live intentionally. And that's where philosophy returns, not as cold theory, but as lived practice. Because the real philosopher isn't the one who retreats into logic alone. It's the one who dares to feel deeply and think clearly at the same time. The one who integrates heart and mind. The one who knows that wisdom isn't found in escaping emotion, but in understanding how emotion shapes every layer of reality. So as we close, let me ask you one final question, perhaps the most important of all. What emotion has been quietly running your life without your permission? And now that you see it, what will you do with that knowledge? Because once you see the strings, you can begin to untangle them. Once you feel the compass, you can begin to trust it. And once you understand that emotion secretly rules your mind not as a tyrant, but as a teacher, you're no longer its slave. You are, finally, its student. And in that moment, you don't just understand Hume's shocking insight, you become it.